Russia's colossal military-industrial complex, MIC, has historically served as a critical, almost singular pillar of its national economy and the primary engine driving its protracted military campaign in Ukraine. Over the course of the conflict, literally trillions of dollars have been aggressively channeled into this sector, which in turn experienced a period of rapid, almost unprecedented expansion during the initial 3 years of the full-scale invasion. However, this seemingly unstoppable growth trajectory is now showing definitive, undeniable signs of stagnation and contraction, a harsh economic reality that even high-ranking Russian banking officials and the government's own official statistics agency can no longer effectively conceal. This profound shift is far more significant than a mere economic blip, as Russia's reliance on its MIC extends far beyond the battlefield. The Kremlin depends on it not only to furnish the endless, resource-intensive stream of tanks, armored vehicles, drones, and munitions deployed daily in Ukraine, but also, crucially, to prevent the broader Russian economy from spiraling into a deep, dramatic, and potentially irreversible recession. In essence, the defense industry has functioned as a crucial economic lifeboat for the Kremlin, a last-ditch effort to maintain fiscal stability. While other key sectors across Russia, such as general manufacturing, agriculture, mining, and energy production, have struggled and contracted severely under the combined strain of the ongoing war and escalating international sanctions, the military sector managed to maintain a facade of stability and even achieved rapid growth rates between 2022 and 2025. Yet, financial analysts and economic experts consistently warned that this singular, war-driven growth could not be sustained indefinitely. No major global economy can rely solely on military production to power its entire complex system. The economic principle of crowding out, where massive defense spending stifles civilian investment and innovation, was always destined to catch up, creating a dangerous dependency on a single, volatile sector. The long-term health of the Russian economy has been sacrificed at the altar of short-term military necessity, a strategic blunder that is now coming home to roost. The first clear, undeniable indicators of this economic trouble emerged in the summer of 2025 at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. Elvira Nabiullina, the highly respected governor of Russia's central bank, publicly acknowledged the dwindling nature of the nation's financial reserves, a statement that sent palpable ripples of concern through the financial community. Simultaneously, Maxim Reshetnikov, the economy minister, confirmed the alarming news that Russia was rapidly approaching the verge of a transition to recession. This grim assessment was immediately echoed by Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, who noted that regional governors were struggling immensely to balance their budgets due to sharply declining business profits, reduced exports, and a general pervasive deterioration of the economic climate across the Federation. Despite these clear and alarming warnings from his own economic team, President Vladimir Putin defiantly reaffirmed his commitment to the war, announcing only minimal, almost symbolic defense budget adjustments for 2026, and pledging to continue the fight until all political objectives in Ukraine were met. The Kremlin further underscored this commitment by allocating nearly 40% of its entire federal budget to defense and law enforcement spending for 2026 and the subsequent years. This singular high-risk focus on conflict, prioritizing military expenditure above all other economic and social considerations, has inevitably pushed the Russian economy into an increasingly precarious and unstable state. Putin has staked his entire economic stability on the arms industry's strength, a monumental gamble that is now showing definitive signs of failure, threatening to unravel the entire war effort and expose the fragility of the Russian state's financial planning. The fraying of this economic tightrope is clearly and unequivocally demonstrated in statistics compiled by the Russian news outlet, the Moscow Times, and published in a critical October report titled, "The economy has lost its last slack. Military production in Russia has begun to decline." The report highlights a critical and long-feared turning point. The military-industrial complex, which had become the main driver of the Russian economy, thanks to trillions in budget spending on state defense orders, has unexpectedly faltered. For the first time since the war, industries related to the military-industrial complex have stagnated or contracted in production after nearly 3 years of double-digit growth, according to Rosstat data. Rosstat, the Federal State Statistics Service of Russia, provided the raw, undeniable data that exposed this sharp and sudden reversal. The September 2025 figures revealed astonishing output declines in sectors directly linked to the MIC, suggesting that the war economy's engine is sputtering. For instance, the production of finished metal products, a key component for virtually all weapons manufacturing, which had seen robust war-fueled growth, 26.4% in 2023, 31.6% in 2024, and a strong plus 121.2% in August 2025, unexpectedly turned negative in September, registering a 1.6% year-on-year decline. This sudden drop, following months of sustained double-digit growth, signals a profound structural issue and a severe bottleneck in the supply chain, indicating that the capacity for basic component production is finally being exhausted. Even more damning and indicative of a deep-seated crisis was the output in the other transport equipment category, which specifically includes the production of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, the very backbone of Russia's ground forces. This sector saw its output plummet from a massive 61.2% growth in August to a mere 6% in September. This represents a catastrophic collapse where the number of tanks and armored vehicles produced in September was less than 10% of the total output for August. When contrasted with the previous 2 years' average growth rates of 29% and 34.2%, this sudden contraction is described by analysts as shocking and utterly unsustainable for a nation engaged in a high-intensity war of attrition. The dramatic drop in heavy armor production directly translates to a reduced ability to launch large-scale offensives and replace the thousands of vehicles lost on the front lines. The overall picture is one of systemic, widespread slowdown across the defense sector, a clear sign that the massive state orders are no longer translating into physical output. Production of finished metal products dropped by 6% month over month, indicating a severe and immediate bottleneck in the supply chain for basic components necessary for assembly. This is a foundational problem that affects every subsequent stage of weapons manufacturing. Output of other transport equipment collapsed by a staggering 20% month over month, a clear sign that the assembly lines for heavy armor are grinding to a halt, directly impacting the ability to replace battlefield losses and sustain the war effort. Analysts at the Russian Economic Statistics Analysis Group, MEMOMI, described these figures as alarming, noting that the defense-related industrial sectors, which had previously been the sole support for the Russian economy, were now beginning to act as a significant drag. The broader manufacturing index only managed a meager 0.4% year-on-year rise in September, a growth rate 8 times slower than the 2.4% increase reported in August. This data unequivocally confirms that Russia's arms industry is in a clear state of decline, posing a monumental and existential problem for an economy that has become dangerously dependent on its defense sector to stave off recession. The inability of the MIC to maintain its growth is now actively pulling the rest of the economy down, creating a vicious cycle of decline. The severity of the situation is such that even high-ranking officials within Russia's financial sector are publicly sounding the alarm, a development that speaks volumes in the tightly controlled political environment. Denis Popov, the chief analyst at the state-owned PSB Bank, noted that the manufacturing industry, the largest economic sector in Russia, experienced its weakest growth since early 2023. He highlighted that growth was confined to a limited number of industries, such as food, light industry, pharmaceuticals, and certain mechanical engineering sectors. Crucially, mechanical engineering, the traditional main driver of manufacturing, showed no significant growth for the first time in a long period, registering a 0.1% year-on-year decline. In September, this suggests that the massive state defense orders are no longer sufficient to offset the decline in other areas, and the economic benefits of the war economy are becoming highly concentrated and rapidly diminishing, failing to trickle down to the broader population. The stagnation extends to Russia's overall industrial output, which accounts for approximately 30% of the country's gross domestic product, GDP. This output rose by only 3% year-on-year in September 2025. A stark contrast to the much healthier 5.6% figure from the previous year. Popov concluded that industrial production has virtually ceased growing, driven only by weak positive dynamics in a few limited sectors, and issued a dire warning that the risks of overcooling the Russian economy are very high, especially given the impending budget cuts in the fourth quarter. This overcooling is a euphemism for a deep structural recession, a consequence of prioritizing military spending over sustainable economic development. Adding to this grim assessment, analysts at the Russian MAP Economic Development Agency reported that total industrial production has dropped by 3.6% since December 2024. Furthermore, civilian industries, the backbone of a healthy, diversified economy, have seen their output shrink by 1% by September. Compared to the start of the year, the recessionary environment is widespread. 18 out of 24, 75%, of all manufacturing categories tracked by Rostat are officially in recession. Even the machinery sector, heavily reliant on government defense contracts, saw a decline of 0.1% in September, following a strong 15.7% rise in August. The economy is also grappling with a year-to-date 21% drop in energy revenues and a deficit 5 times higher than anticipated. The Russian Academy of Science estimated that the GDP shrank by 0.6% in the first half of 2025. Annual growth has nearly vanished, reaching a meager 4% through the summer months. The data is conclusive. The arms industry is no longer the unstoppable force propping up the Russian economy. It is now subject to the same periods of decline and loss as any other sector, signaling a systemic failure of the war economy model and a looming fiscal crisis that threatens the stability of the entire federation. The collapse of the MIC is not attributable to a single, isolated cause, but rather a confluence of 5 major, interconnected factors, each amplifying the negative effects of the others and creating a perfect storm for the Russian defense sector. The conflict itself is the most obvious and impactful factor. It has been astonishingly costly, consuming vast amounts of Russia's national wealth fund and other assets. Despite the expenditure, the Kremlin has failed to achieve the swift victories anticipated in 2022. The human and material losses are staggering, well over 1 million soldiers killed or wounded, and thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, artillery systems, and aircraft either damaged or destroyed. The financial costs associated with these losses are immense, including spiraling recruitment costs. Russia is forced to offer increasingly high cash incentives and military salaries to attract recruits, alongside inevitable compensation payments to the families of the deceased. This creates a massive long-term fiscal burden that diverts funds from other critical areas. The average monthly salary for a contract soldier has skyrocketed, placing immense pressure on the federal budget, which must also cover the rising costs of medical care and rehabilitation for the wounded, a cost that will persist for decades. Procurement and repair costs. The expense of procuring, producing, maintaining, and repairing high-value systems, some valued in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, is unsustainable. Each successful Ukrainian strike on a radar or air defense system creates a massive financial gap that must be filled to maintain military capability, leading to a constant, losing race against attrition. The sheer volume of equipment required to replace losses is overwhelming the production capacity, forcing the military to pull older, less reliable Soviet-era equipment out of storage, further increasing maintenance costs and reducing operational effectiveness. The need to replace advanced systems with inferior, older models is a clear sign of the MIC's struggle. Oil infrastructure attacks. Ukrainian drone and missile attacks on oil infrastructure have been a catalyst for further economic chaos, leading to one of the worst fuel crises in the Federation's history, directly impacting the MIC's operational capacity and the broader economy by disrupting the supply of vital energy resources. These attacks not only reduce export revenue, but also force the government to divert resources to repair and protect these critical facilities, a massive and ongoing security expenditure. Sanctions, imposed almost immediately after the invasion, are now taking a severe cumulative toll. While Russia initially weathered the storm, the effect is now hitting the arms industry hard. Recent waves of sanctions have made it increasingly difficult for Russian defense companies to import the vital technologies and components necessary for modern weapons development. Firms are struggling to pursue high-end projects like AI-powered drones and cutting-edge air defenses because global partners are refusing to supply critical components. Russia, despite its vast natural resources, cannot produce everything domestically and is being isolated from the global supply chain. The sanctions are not only persisting but are becoming progressively more severe, a recent wave announced by the U.S. Treasury Department on October 22, 2025, specifically targeted Russia's oil industry, which is intrinsically linked to the MIC as fuel is vital for production and battlefield operation. Major oil giants like Rosneft, and Lukoil were targeted, with their US-based assets frozen. The sanctions set a November 21st deadline For companies to wind down dealings with Rosneft and Lukoil, and the threat of secondary sanctions on foreign financial institutions dealing with these firms further tightens the economic noose, effectively cutting off major revenue streams that feed the war machine and limiting access to the global financial system. The EU is also continuing to ramp up pressure, focusing on the energy sector, the lifeblood of the Russian economy and its war machine, with new packages targeting specific technologies and individuals involved in the MIC, ensuring a sustained and increasing economic pressure. Russia's reputation as a reliable arms exporter is collapsing. Historically a major supplier of tanks, fighter jets, and military systems, particularly to nations in Asia, Russia is now being viewed with deep skepticism. International buyers are seeing headlines of Russian equipment being destroyed in Ukraine, tanks blown up, air defenses failing against basic drones, and artillery systems proving ineffective. Countries are questioning the value of spending vast sums on systems that have proven so feeble. India, historically a massive buyer of Russian arms, is shifting its focus to its domestic, Made in India initiative and is increasingly looking to other nations, such as the US, e.g. Reaper drones, for imports. Vietnam, which built its military on Soviet equipment, is pivoting toward American systems like the C-130J and F-16. The statistics are stark. Russia's arms exports plummeted from $14.6 billion in 2021 to below $1 billion by 2024. The number of countries purchasing major Russian arms dropped from 31 in 2019 to just 12 in 2024, a trend expected to continue as the war exposes the technological inferiority of Russian hardware. Data from the Poor Jamestown Foundation confirms this rapid decline: $12.5 billion in 2021, $8 billion in 2022, $3 billion in 2023, and only $1 billion in 2024. This loss of market share represents a permanent, long-term damage to Russia's global standing and a massive loss of foreign currency revenue, which is essential for funding the war and importing critical components. The perception of Russian military technology has fundamentally shifted from a reliable, cost-effective option to a risky, underperforming investment, a change that will take decades to reverse. The war has triggered a profound labor crisis. Approximately 1 million Russians have fled the country since the conflict began, including many highly skilled individuals and young graduates vital for military development and engineering. Countless others have been mobilized, killed, or wounded, removing them permanently or temporarily from the workforce. The MIC's insatiable demand cannot be met by the remaining population. In 2024, the Russian parliament acknowledged a deficit of 400,000 workers in the defense industry. In a desperate attempt to meet demand, defense companies have resorted to extreme and often unethical measures, running facilities around the clock with grueling 12-hour, 6-day work weeks, leading to burnout and decreased efficiency. Using prison inmates to fill staffing gaps, a measure that raises serious ethical concerns and provides a low-skilled workforce. Importing workers from North Korea, with some estimates suggesting as many as 20,000 North Korean workers are being used in military production facilities, often under slave-like conditions. This reliance on a foreign, potentially exploited workforce highlights the depth of the domestic labor crisis. Flying in several hundred women from Central and West Africa to work in facilities like the Alabuga drone factory, Shan. This desperate measure further underscores the inability of the Russian labor market to meet the demands of the war economy. The reliance on increasingly unskilled and overworked labor increases the risk of mistakes and industrial disasters, further compounding the problem and leading to a decline in the quality of output. The lack of skilled engineers and technicians is a long-term structural problem that cannot be solved by simply increasing working hours or importing low-cost labor. Due to sanctions and component shortages, Russian defense firms are increasingly unable to pursue high-end, futuristic military projects. Instead, they are largely confined to producing simple, often Soviet-era technology and lower-quality goods in massive quantity. A Chatham House report explains that production will likely have to be simplified and slowed, forcing Russia to accept reduced quality and suffer from new innovation stagnation in its technological research and development. In the rapidly evolving field of defense, stagnation is a death sentence. The Kremlin's defense companies will find it increasingly difficult to innovate, leading to the collapse of smaller firms and ensuring that frontline forces continue to receive mediocre equipment, while Ukraine fields more advanced domestic and allied weaponry. This technological gap will only widen over time, making Russia's military increasingly obsolete and less competitive on the global stage. The focus on quantity over quality, driven by necessity, is fundamentally undermining the long-term technological viability of the Russian military. The problems facing Russia's arms industry are far more than a simple economic downturn. They are directly linked to the Kremlin's prospects of achieving its war aim. As the industry, which was meant to be the economic savior, deteriorates under the combined weight of unsustainable costs, crippling sanctions, loss of markets, labor shortages, and technological stagnation, those prospects become increasingly grim. The systemic failure of the MIC signals a deep vulnerability that the Kremlin can no longer mask with propaganda, suggesting that the war economy is finally reaching its breaking point. The confluence of these 5 factors creates a feedback loop of decline, where each problem exacerbates the others, making a swift recovery highly improbable. The long-term consequences for Russia's economy and its global standing are severe and will likely outlast the conflict itself.